About 20 years ago, I was going through a really difficult season in my life. Becca and I had been married about 5 years at the time, and honestly, those earlier years of marriage, they were just a struggle. I mean, we loved each other, but things were hard. And at the same time, I was serving as a pastor, and I was struggling there too. Ministry wasn't going the way I had hoped. I felt discouraged. I was worn down and questioning a lot of things. Well, right in the middle of that season, my mother-in-law, who is a deeply godly woman who loves the Lord, she did something that changed my life. She wrote me a letter. But it wasn't just any letter. She wrote it from the perspective of Jesus, reminding me of who God is and reminding me of who I am in Him. And near the end of that letter was a line that I've never forgotten, and it hit me like a lightning bolt. She wrote this: "Brian, you are my beloved son, who I died on the cross for. There is nothing you can do to earn my love, and there is nothing you can do to lose it." Do you realize how freeing that truth is? God's love for you, it's not dependent upon your performance. Your sin doesn't make Him stop loving you. Your failures don't cancel His love. Even your successes don't increase His love. His love for you is not based on what you do. It's based on who He is. And as we wrap up in the 20-year journey of Jacob's life, the completion of his long road home, we're going to see this truth come alive in full color. Because the lesson of Jacob's life, it shows us this: there's nothing you can do to earn God's love, and there's nothing you can do to lose it. Well, before we jump into Genesis chapter 35, I want to remind us of something that God said to Jacob years earlier. Well, at that point in the story, Jacob was running for his life. He was fleeing from his brother Esau, who wanted to kill him. And Jacob had nothing. No home, no security, no clear future ahead of him. And one night he stopped to sleep at a place he would later name Bethel. And think about how desperate his situation was at that point. Scripture tells us the only thing he had for a pillow was a stone. I mean, that's it, a rock. A pillow under the open sky. But in that moment when Jacob had nothing, God met him. As Jacob slept, God gave him a vision of a ladder reaching up down from heaven to the earth, with the angels ascending and descending on it. And in that moment, God spoke a promise over Jacob's life. So before we move back into chapter 35, let's go back and reread what God said to him in Genesis chapter 28. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. And the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and He said, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." And it's just this promise that is so powerful. At the time, Jacob had no idea how precious that promise would become. Because in essence, God was saying to him that night is this: Jacob, this is unconditional. I am with you. Now, think about that promise in light of everything that has happened in Jacob's life since then. Jacob and Esau, born as twins to Isaac and Rebekah, already jostling in the womb before they're even born. The older twin Esau later sold his birthright for a bowl of stew. Then Jacob deceived his father Isaac and stole the blessing. Esau was so furious, he vowed to kill Jacob. So Jacob had to run for his life. On the way, alone and homeless, God met him in this vision, a staircase reaching from heaven to earth. And that's when God made the promise, I am with you. Then Jacob arrived at his uncle Laban's house. He worked 7 years to marry Rachel, the woman he loved, only to be deceived by Laban and tricked into marrying her older sister Leah instead. So he worked another 7 years for Rachel. Eventually, Jacob had to flee from Laban with his family, and they built a pillar of stones as a boundary marker, basically saying, let's go separate ways and let's never see each other again. Then on the journey home, Jacob had to face the brother he had betrayed. And the night before meeting Esau, Jacob wrestled with the Lord all night long. And when the night was over, he had nothing left but God. And so he clung to God. And that's when God changed his name. No longer Jacob, the heel catcher, the deceiver, the grabber. Now he would be called Israel, the one who wrestles with God, the one who contends with God, the one for whom God fights. And when he finally met Esau, something incredible happened. Instead of killing him, Esau ran to him, embraced him, and welcomed him like a long-lost brother. But the story didn't stay peaceful for very long. Jacob settled near the pagan city of Shechem. His daughter Dinah befriended the women of the land, and tragically, she was assaulted by a man named Shechem. Her brothers responded with brutal vengeance, deceiving the men of the city, convincing them to be circumcised, and then slaughtering them while they were weak and in pain. It was one of the darkest moments in Jacob's story. And after all that, Jacob returned to Bethel, the very place where he first met God alone. But this time, he didn't come alone. He brought his entire family. And before they met with God, Jacob told them to get rid of every false god they had picked up along the way. Which brings us to where we are today as we finish Genesis chapter 35. Now, if you were to chart the ups and downs of Jacob's life, it looked like a roller coaster. I mean, down, far from God at his father's home. Up, when God met him at Bethel. Down, years of struggle under Uncle Laban. Up, when he had nothing left and clung to God after wrestling with him. Down, the tragedy of Dinah and the slaughter of Shechem. And now up again as Jacob leads his family back to Bethel to meet with God. Through all the ups and the downs, through the victories and the failures, through sin and redemption, God was with Jacob. All along, God has been saying, I am with you, Jacob. And now after 20 years of life, struggle, walking with God, Jacob can finally say, God has been with me. Jacob has learned just how powerful that promise really is. Because what God promised him that night was this. It's unconditional, Jacob. I am with you. There's nothing you can do to earn God's love. There's nothing. And there's nothing you can do to lose it. So now, let's see what happens next as we finish Genesis chapter 35. Let's pick it back up where we left off in verse 16. Then they moved on from Bethel. So just the context, Jacob has moved his family from Shechem to Bethel to meet with God. And that's what we looked at last time. And now the journey continues. Jacob and his family are traveling towards Ephrath, which was the original name for Bethlehem. And if we apply everything we've learned from Jacob's life so far, we know something important. God is with him, even now, as he's about to walk into one of the deepest valleys of his life. In this moment, Jacob will have to remember the promise God made him years earlier, is that it's unconditional, Jacob. I am with you. The verse continues. While they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth. and had great difficulty. Now remember, Rachel was the one that Jacob loved. She was the beautiful one, the one he worked 7 years to marry. But while Rachel had Jacob's heart, Leah became something like a baby factory, giving birth to son after son after son. Rachel, on the other hand, she had struggled with infertility. For years, she couldn't conceive until finally she gave birth to Joseph. Well, now, as the family is traveling from Bethel towards Bethlehem, Rachel goes into labor again. She's about to have her second child, but there's a problem in verse 17. And as she was having great difficulty in childbirth, the midwife said to her, "Don't despair, for you have another son." So the midwife, she knew Rachel's greatest dream in life was to have children, sons. In fact, when she had her first son, when he was born, she named him Joseph, which means may he add another, as in may God add another son. So now as Rachel is dying in childbirth, the midwife tries to comfort her. She tells her, "Don't be afraid. You have another son." In other words, Rachel, even in this moment, the thing you have longed for most has happened. Verse 18 says, as she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named her son Ben-Oni. That name means son of my sorrow. But then we read something powerful. But his father named him Benjamin. So Jacob changes the child's name. Rachel had named him Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow, but Jacob renames him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. It's a powerful moment, because in the ancient world, the right hand, that was the place of honor, of closeness and love. And in that moment, Jacob is doing something beautiful. Instead of allowing this child, his identity to be forever tied to tragedy and sorrow, he gives him a name that reflects honor and love, a reminder that through all the ups and downs of his life, Rachel had been his great love, the one who stood at his right hand. Well, in the middle of that deep grief, Jacob turns sorrow into something meaningful. He gives the child a name that recognizes he was the answer to Rachel's long prayer for another son. And if you want to see where that longing began, go back to Genesis chapter 30. Right after Rachel finally had that son she had waited so long for, Joseph, the very next thing she said was this. She named him Joseph and said, "May the Lord add to me another son." Do you see what's happening in her life? Often, the things that we desire most, the things we think will finally satisfy us, still leave us feeling empty. Rachel had beauty. She had a husband who deeply loved her, but she still felt something missing. Instead of finding her identity in the Lord, she began defining her worth by her ability to produce sons. And one son wasn't enough. She wanted another. But tragically, the fulfillment of that desire came with deep sorrow, because the birth of that second son led directly to her death. And that's why it's so important to anchor your identity, your peace, your life in the Lord, because this world ultimately cannot satisfy. Not success, not relationships, not even something as beautiful as the birth of a child. True satisfaction is found only in relationship with the Lord. Verse 19, so Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Over her tomb, Jacob set up a pillar, and to this day, that pillar marks Rachel's tomb. And this is absolutely a bittersweet tragedy in Jacob's life. He had a son, but Rachel, his beloved wife, the love of his life, is dead and buried alongside the road as they travel towards their future. But even in this heartbreaking moment, the Lord was with him. And what's fascinating is that this moment connects to something much bigger in the story of Scripture. Rachel was buried on her way to Bethlehem. And Bethlehem, of course, would later become the village where Jesus, the Messiah, the offspring promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, would be born to bless the whole world. About 2 years after Jesus was born, the Magi came looking for a new king. Well, when King Herod realized he had been outwitted, he reacted with fury, and he ordered every boy 2 years and under in Bethlehem to be killed in an attempt to wipe out this new king. And in the Gospel of Matthew, that tragic event is connected back to Rachel. Matthew writes, "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more." What began as the sorrow of Jacob losing Rachel on the road near Bethlehem became a symbol pointing towards another tragic moment in Israel's story. Rachel's grief became a picture of the grief of the mothers of Bethlehem. Well, today, Rachel's tomb is considered a well-known place in Israel. And 50 years ago, it was simply a small tomb on the side of the road. Well, today, it's a heavily secured site where people come to pray. In fact, it's considered the third holiest site in Judaism. Well, now, there is some debate about whether the traditional site is the exact location, because the tomb people visit today sits right next to Bethlehem. But some biblical descriptions suggest it may have been on the way to Bethlehem near Ramah, which is actually north of Jerusalem. So is the traditional site the exact place? Maybe not. But ultimately, that's not the most important point. What matters most is this, is even in the middle of tragedy, even in the valley of grief, God was still with Jacob. The promise never changed. It was unconditional. And the same was true then as it is now, is that God's presence is not dependent upon circumstances. Verse 21, Israel, so just notice Jacob is called Israel, moved on again and pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder. The text tells us Jacob settles near a place called Migdal Eder, which means Tower of the Flock. It's located near Bethlehem. That's very significant because this is the very region where generations later the Messiah would be born. The most important descendant in Israel's line would come from this very place. So Jacob is now living right there near Bethlehem. And at this point in his life, Jacob knows something he didn't fully understand years earlier. It's that God is with him and he's going to need that promise because he's about to walk through one of the most painful seasons of his life. But that promise still stands. There's nothing you can do, Jacob, to earn God's love, and there's nothing you can do to lose it. Verse 22, while Israel was living in that region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine, Bilhah, and Israel heard of it. Now, this is one of those verses in Scripture you almost wish wasn't there. But the Bible doesn't tell us what we wish had happened. It tells us what actually did happen. First, the act itself. Reuben, Jacob's firstborn son, sleeps with Bilhah, his father's concubine. And the Hebrew text it's interesting here. It almost feels abrupt. The sentence just cuts off. There's no immediate explanation, no resolution, no listed consequences in this moment. It just moves on. But in the ancient world, this was a far more than just a sexual sin. This was a political move. By sleeping with his father's concubine, Reuben was essentially making a claim to his father's authority and estate before his father had even died. It was a pure act of pure rebellion. In effect, Reuben was challenging Jacob's leadership over the entire clan. Now, the Hebrew text here, it leaves us hanging, but the story isn't over. Reuben did face consequences. Listen to what we learned later in 1 Chronicles chapter 5. The sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, he was the firstborn. But when he defiled his father's marriage bed, his rights as firstborn were given to the sons of Joseph, son of Israel. In other words, Reuben lost his birthright, just like his uncle Esau. And this also helps explain something bigger in the story of Israel. The tribe of Reuben, it fades in importance while Judah rises, because it would be through Judah that the Messiah would come. And then years later, on Jacob's deathbed, he addresses this moment directly. Listen to what Jacob says in Genesis chapter 49. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power. Turbulent as the waters, you will no longer excel. For you went up onto your father's bed, onto my couch, and defiled it. Reuben's moment of rebellion cost him everything that came with being the firstborn. And that reminds us of something important, is that God being with us does not mean that life will be free of tragedy, sin, or even betrayal. Well, Jacob experienced all of it. But what God's promise means is this: even in the middle of tragedy, even in the middle of betrayal, we are not alone. And that promise, it still stands. There is nothing we can do to earn God's love, and there's nothing we can do to lose it. Verse 22 continues. Jacob had 12 sons, the sons of Leah, Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, the sons of Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin, the sons of Rachel's servant Bilhah, Dan, and Naphtali, the sons of Leah's servant Zilpah, Gad, and Asher. These were the sons of Jacob, who were born to him in Padan Aram. And here they are, the 12 sons of Jacob, who will become the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. And as we put this family tree back on screen, this genogram, you can see just how broken this family really was. I mean, betrayal, infighting, favoritism, murder, sexual sin. This is not a polished, picture-perfect family, and yet God is still with them. God is still working. God is still orchestrating his plan, because the promise he first made to Abraham to produce a nation through whom the Savior of the world would come was never dependent on the righteousness of this family. It depended on the character of God alone. And from these 12 sons, God would raise up the 12 tribes of Israel, who centuries later each would inherit their own territory within the promised land under Joshua. So think about that. Even for the people of Israel, the same truth applies. There's nothing they could do to earn God's love, and there's nothing they could do to lose it, because that love is not based on their character, but it's based upon his. Verse 27, Jacob came home to his father Isaac in Mamre, near Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. Finally, it's been a long time, but Jacob comes home. It's more than 20 years after deceiving his father, more than 20 years after fleeing from his brother Esau. Jacob finally returns. He comes home to his father Isaac. And in a sense, he's also returning to the legacy of his grandfather Abraham, the man to whom God first made this incredible promise while he was living in Haran and Padan Aram. Listen again to what God said in Genesis chapter 12. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, And whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Well, we're seeing that promise to Abraham now coming to a reality in his grandson Jacob, now named Israel. Verse 28, Isaac lived 180 years. Then he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people, old and full of years. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. Notice who buries Isaac. It's both of his sons, Jacob and his twin brother Esau. No longer enemies, no longer competing against each other, just brothers standing together to bury their father. And this takes place at a very important location, the cave of Machpelah. This was the only piece of property Abraham ever owned in the Promised Land. Everything else was still just a promise from God. And what's fascinating is that this place, there's actually strong evidence that this traditional site people visit today really is the location. And it became the burial place of 3 patriarchal couples. First, Abraham and Sarah were buried here. Then Isaac and Rebekah, they were buried here. And eventually Jacob and Leah. But there's one matriarch who is not buried there. It's Rachel. Because as we saw earlier in this chapter, Rachel was buried on the side of the road on the way to Bethlehem after she died giving birth to Benjamin. Another reminder that even in the middle of God's promises unfolding, life still carried moments of deep sorrow. So as we close, I want to bring us back to the promise we opened with. God said to Jacob, I am with you and I will watch over you wherever you go. And I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Well, that was a promise to Jacob. And as we've seen through his life, it was unconditional. Despite Jacob's failures, despite the chaos in his family, despite the ups and the downs of his journey, God was always with him. But that raises an important question. What about us? Is that promise still true for us today? Absolutely. And this is one of the reasons I love studying the Old Testament. Listen to what Paul says in Romans chapter 15. For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope. Jacob's life was written down for us, to remind us that when God makes a promise to his people, he keeps it. Listen to just a few of the promises God has given to us. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 28, surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. In John chapter 14, Jesus said, I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. And in Hebrews 13, we read, never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. And I'll just think about the ups and downs of Jacob's life, the failures, the struggles, the tragedies, the victories, and through it all, God was still with them. And that same is true for us today. No matter the ups or downs of your life, there's nothing you can do to earn God's love, and there's nothing you can do to lose it.